So, hi, Erika. Before we begin, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Avi, and I'm the founder of UX Salon. And the reason we're talking here, we're talking before I say that we're on UX on coffee, which means we both have coffees here.
hmm
And the format is that simple. Basically, we talk until we run out of coffees.
Oh,
And we're not limited by time, but how much coffees we have in our mugs. So, cheers. Thanks for having coffee with me.
thank you. Yeah,
Uh,
great to be
I,
here.
Yes, I will introduce you. This is Erika Hall. She's the co-founder and director of strategy at Mule Design and
hmm
the author of Just Enough Research, which came out from a book apart. So the reason I wanted to talk to you first of all is because you're coming to Tel Aviv very shortly in April for UX Salon conference in 2016 in April, and I'm very excited to have you. I think it's going to be an amazing time to host you
Yeah.
here and to hear your talk. So I want to ask you about your book, Just Enough
hmm
Research. Why did you write it, and what is it about, and what are we going to hear from you when you come here?
hmm well, the reason I wrote it is because as a designer, I've always had a research-driven practice from the very first, just because that's how I was trained in the first agency I worked in. But I found in my work that a lot of people who haven't had that kind of background are very suspicious of research, and a lot of the books that already exist are written by professional researchers or people with an academic background, and they're like that big. And if you go to somebody who's a developer or a business person or a designer and say, you should learn about research, and you hand them the book that's, $80 and 500 pages, they don't believe it's simple. And so I wrote a very small book to say you can do just enough and it's good.
So just
So,
enough means, if I understand it correctly, it's better than nothing. Just
mhm.
enough is something, but you quantify, like, you quantify how much is necessary for research, or what is it exactly? Can you go deeper?
Oh yeah, yeah. It all depends on your goals, and that's what I talk about in the book. Is there's no because people worry when they say, "Oh, I'm going to start doing research." Uh, I want to do enough, and the point is that the right amount really depends on what you need to know. There's no one right part or one right amount, and people treat it like it's science, but it's not like science because any research that helps you meet your goal, doing applied research, is good. Like there's really, as long as you're being ethical, there's no wrong and you can always do more. So just try it and see if you get your questions answered. And that's sort of the idea is you just get started and then you get a sense for how much you need to do. And I talk about a bit in the book and when I do talks about the idea of risk, because the whole point of doing design research or product research is to reduce your risk. Because otherwise, if you don't do research, it's all assumptions or guessing or I wish this is true. And then if you build a whole product or design something based on those assumptions, and you're wrong, then you've wasted everything and you have to start over or correct. And so that's how you tell how much is the right amount. It's like, well, where are my risks? And you use that to guide what research you choose to do.
But still, research is considered something that is expensive or not for us, or like let's just we
Uh,
use our intuition. What is the role of intuition in design, if you don't mind me asking?
well, people who talk about intuition, that can be probably one of three things. For a lot of people, like if you're a very, very experienced designer, that intuition is based on a lot of experience. So you could consider that your research, to a certain extent. You could say, well, I've solved this kind of problem, so I have a lot of experience I can draw from. So I have evidence about the real world. Um, Another word for intuition is like you could think of it as like inspiration. Like you see something and you're like, oh, I have a great idea now. like if you're out in the world. That could be something, but that can't, it depends on what project it is, but sometimes you do go out into the world and you have an insight about the world that inspires you. And that can also be a kind of research. And then the last word, the last sort of use of the word intuition is ego, where you really want to be the one with the right answer. And that's the sort of intuition that will lead you down the wrong path. If you're like, oh, I should know this, I want to know this, instead of I want to find this out. So you can think of, I think, intuition in those ways. But design isn't magic. Design is about, knowing about the worlds that your solution's going to fit into, and then connecting the dots and having an insight that helps you solve a problem in a new way. But you have to know about the world, because even if you come up with something hugely innovative, think about like the iPhone. People say, oh, the iPhone has really, really changed life. But for most people, the rest of their life is very similar. They put the key in the door to come home. They might drive somewhere in their car. They pick their kids up from school. And so there's all of this around the iPhone that the iPhone has to fit into, because it doesn't change that.
So essentially, I mean, as a good designer, I would have an intuition to do research, because sometimes the saying is that the first rule of user experience is you are not the user, which is basically dismissing any intuition by saying, well, I'm not the user, I don't know, I mean, I should not assume. But is there a role for, like, can we use intuition instead of research in some ways? Like, beside that first point where you said it's like our experience. But is there a point where we say, well, let's not waste a week of research, let's just do this? How do you say to someone, maybe you should spend that time?
Well, the way that we talk about it a lot is people say, oh, there's research and it's a separate thing. But instead of being part of the process, it does a couple things. One, you make sure that you have all the information you need to not just try something, because otherwise, if you don't, if you have questions and you're just going to guess, because I think some people, it does come from ego, not from this sense of understanding. It's very satisfying to have the right answer. But the other thing that research does that I talk about a lot, because it's really important, is research gives you that framework for making a decision. Because a design project is a series of decisions. And these days, things we're designing are so complicated. You need a lot of different people involved. And so if you're a smart person and you're working on a project, and there's another smart person working on a project, and you have two different intuitions, how do you resolve that? How do you say, my intuition is better than your intuition?
You do research.
Yeah, exactly. So you use that and you have a shared reality, and you say, okay, now we use that to make decisions and to reconcile our arguments.
I often think that actually design in a co-working space or in a group, in a team, is about that back and forth. It's about those arguments. It's about, that creates a better solution at the end. But still, there's some factor to put in research, you mean? Is that
Yeah, absolutely. When people talk about collaboration, a lot of times they think of it as always agreeing and never fighting. And that's not the case at all. Like, really, really good collaboration does have that back and forth. But you need to be grounded, because if one person says, oh, this audience is the most important, and the other person says this audience is the most important, and you haven't sort of built that framework before you start, then you're going to have unproductive fighting, right? But if you agree on, here's the goal, and here's the audience, and here's the problem, and here's how the audience is currently behaving, and you know that, then you can have productive arguments about the best way to solve the problem, as opposed to fighting about my opinion versus your opinion, or I'm in charge, so do it my way. So there's good fighting and there's bad fighting. And that good argument is really, really productive, but you have to know that you're using the same language and trying to solve the same problem and agree on the business goals. And that's what research does. And so when people ask us, like, oh, can't we just cut those weeks out in the beginning? My answer is you will save them, because if you don't work out some of those initial things in the research period, then you'll just go around in circles and never make a decision. And we've seen this happen with people. But if you do that part in the beginning, that serves you and makes everything go faster. And that's really true, and we've seen this again and again.
Cool. So your book is a research method, or is it what is it about? If you can give, like, sell your book. What is it? Who is it for?
It's like I said, it's for anyone working on a product or service, primarily an interactive product, but it could be anybody working on any design problem. And it talks about why research is important, how to think about it, and how to spend your time doing the best research that will help you the most. And so professional researchers can use it to help work with teams, and business people can use it to make better decisions. Designers and developers can also use it to make sure that they have the information they need to do their jobs well. Okay. And it's really short. Like, it's like 120 pages or something like that. It's like you could flip through it in an hour. And then it talks about techniques. So it says, here's why you should do research, here's how it'll help you, and here's some things to try. And it's all qualitative. So it's not about surveys, it's not about measuring things, it's about observing things so that you know that you're solving the right problem. And it's also about understanding your business. Because one of the problems with research is when people say, oh, research is all user research. It's all about ethnography or the people. And they don't think about their organizations, because that's where products fail. Because we see a lot of products that users love, but that the business can't support, and then it fails. And that's just as bad as having a product that users don't like. If you don't look at the business and look at how people have to work together operationally as well.
I mean, that kind of reminds me, or it resonates to your title, Director of Strategy at Mule Design.
Mm-hmm.
Is that strategy? Is that the part of the business? Is that what you're referring to? What is that it? The strategy of design, of where we take the design?
Yeah, it's about understanding why you're doing the thing you're doing, and how you'll know it's successful, and how to prioritize things, and how to think about, your business conceptually from your perspective as well as from your audience's perspective, and kind of making those match. So it works from all, so whatever you're trying to do works from all perspectives, and, bottom line, helps your business, because it doesn't matter, nothing about the design matters if it doesn't help the business you're in.
Okay. You mentioned before that it should be ethical. I want to go back to that. What does that mean? How is looking at ethical, like, what does ethics have to do here with research?
With research, for most of the work that we do, it's not the concerns are, a lot of times we don't get into really tricky territory, but one area is you shouldn't trick people. Like, I think Facebook got into a little trouble not too long ago because they were running a test on people with sentiment information and manipulating the way information was displayed to see if they could change how people reacted to it. Mm-hmm. And they were doing this without letting people know. So if you're studying people for use in a product, you should let them know that. And you should also let people know the general nature of what you're working on. If it is sensitive, like I said, for most things, like if you're doing an online magazine or a video game or something, you might not get into ethical territory. But if it's has to do with healthcare or weapons or children or something where there might be some implications, some ethical implications. You just need to be upfront with anybody you're doing research with to let them know, oh, you're contributing to this type of project. Do you agree? And not manipulate them or hide things.
It won't taint the results?
No, I mean, it shouldn't, because you should be able to describe the nature of the project in a way that lets somebody understand without giving it all away. Like, you don't have to describe the whole thing in detail, but you could say, I'm working on something, in the area of healthcare, and there are different ways to phrase this so you don't, condition the response you get. But for most of the types of projects that we deal with, there's not too much to worry about, and typically, the research that we do isn't going to involve. It's not like a clinical trial where somebody might take a new drug or be in physical harm. Like most people doing like a web app or something won't potentially harm themselves. But you just have to be mindful. You always have to be mindful of what the larger consequences of are anything you're working on. And if you need somebody's participation, just let them know so they don't, say contribute to something and then down the line say, oh, I never would have supported that if I'd known.
Well, there's much to be said about ethics in design, and of course, it's a very short topic, a very long topic to cover right now. But I think it was a nice perspective to look at, to think about when you do research. Also include the ethics of what you're doing. I know you have a background in philosophy, and we were talking that you gave a talk about the philosophy of design. Can you can you give me some of the stuff you're doing these days, so I can some of people can get to know you a bit better, or see what you're thinking about, where you're coming from today?
Oh, sure. So what I've done a couple of talks recently about really being clear on why you're doing something, because even today there's a lot. When you talk about design, people really focus on the how, the technique. People say, oh, a good designer knows Photoshop really well or is really good at CSS. And even if you interview for a job, the recruiter will really focus on what tools do you use. But the nature of design is changing as everything goes digital. A lot of times design can be invisible, and so you can't worry about making a nice picture or drawing. You really have to think about the implications, because they can be huge. Like what I was talking about with Facebook. Facebook, it's over, I don't know, 1 billion plus people. It might be 2 billion people now. And their designs are like in people's relationships. I have a lot of friends now where I only interact with them via Facebook, and Facebook talks about relationships. And you look at a company like Airbnb or Uber, and there's a lot of the design decisions are actually business decisions, and anybody involved in the design needs to think about that, because what we used to think of as design, like the layout, is less and less important because the interface is disappearing. But the implications are getting huger, because you could affect with one decision, or the way you present a choice could affect millions of people, and like how they get to work, how they make their money, how they talk to their mother, But that's not what people traditionally consider a design decision. They think, what does the button look like? But that's less and less important, because, everybody's using phones now. And or they're using a voice interface. Like more and more is going to voice. And it's like you have to think about a whole different set of things when you call yourself a designer and work in that environment.
So, but I mean, the same could be. I mean, the entire world around us is designed, right? Everything around us. I mean, this chair I'm sitting on. I mean, these are all. How does it like? What's the perspective here? And I mean, you could say that about anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the new here?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what's new is that, like with a chair, it really is all about form and materials, right? Like
Mm.
you see it and you get it. But with a lot of digital design now, there's no form. There's nothing to see or touch. It's
Yes.
all the interactive and the logic, and it's all presenting choices to people. Like a chair presents really one choice, like sit, don't sit.
Okay. Yeah. I see. Well, yeah, definitely. I think the world is, with the Internet of Things and the objects around us and
Mm-hmm.
sensors are coming in, we have to make a more conscious decision on how this affects people's life. And I often say that we have to consider how to make our lives better, how to help
Mm-hmm.
mankind, and by that, of course, having people use your product more and more for good.
Yeah.
Um, I think we're running out of coffee. Yes, I'm running out of coffee. Yeah, I didn't have.
Yeah, getting down to the bottom there. Yeah.
But I want to keep it short, so I would say to you, thank you for taking the time with me. I'm really looking forward to see you here very shortly and to host you at the next UX Salon conference. So thank you, Erika, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
See you
Bye
soon.
bye.